The printer's blinking message was the final straw. Paper jam, tray 2. Lydia Hart's hands shook as she yanked at the stubborn tray for the third time, her unfinished report trembling in her grasp. 3 weeks of sleepless nights, endless cups of tea, and missed moments with her daughter, all riding on a meeting that had already started upstairs. Behind her, someone huffed impatiently. If you're done crying over the printer, maybe let someone else try. Lydia flinched and stepped aside, whispering an apology. She was invisible here. 29, divorced, raising a 3-year-old in a flat she could barely afford. Once a full-time mom baking dinosaur cupcakes, now she was the admin girl on a 1-year contract in one of London's sleekest tech firms. People forgot her name. Her manager called her support, and no one cared how much she juggled just to survive. As Lydia leaned into the machine once more, her voice cracked. Please, just work. That's when she heard it, a voice behind her, calm and warm. Need a hand? She turned to find a man in rolled-up sleeves, worn jeans, and holding a wrench. No name tag, no clipboard, just a quiet presence and the faint scent of pine soap. He looked like someone who fixed things not just for a living, but with care. With practiced ease, he opened panels she didn't even know existed. In minutes, the jam was gone and her printer was humming. You should be good now, he said, handing her the first sheet. Their fingers touched briefly. His eyes were gray, gentle. Then he smiled and added, sometimes people pretend not to see until someone brave enough speaks. Before Lydia could ask his name, he vanished down the corridor as silently as he had appeared. It wasn't until a mysterious email arrived the next Monday that Lydia's world began to shift. She had been summoned to the top floor, home to the executives. Confused and anxious, she stepped into a space of gold lighting and polished floors, only to find the same man from the printer now standing in a tailored suit behind a vast desk. He wasn't a janitor. He was Owen Marsh, the CEO. That day, everything changed. A simple act of kindness led to an invitation to something much greater, Project Ember, a new initiative driven by empathy, honesty, and real human connection. Lydia's courage had been seen, and not by just anyone, by someone who mattered, and more importantly, someone who chose to listen. Lydia Hart didn't know what to expect when she stepped into the 12th floor office, her heart pounding like a warning drum in her chest. She had double-checked the strange, unlabeled email a dozen times, her mind spinning with worry. Had someone reported her? Had her offhand remarks near the copier reached the wrong ears? She feared it was the end of her short-lived role, but instead of a reprimand, she found herself face-to-face with the man who had fixed the copier days before, the one in rolled sleeves and calm hands. Only now he wasn't crouched by a printer. He was seated behind a polished oak desk in a custom suit. The quiet janitor she had spoken to was Owen Marsh, the elusive CEO of the company. He greeted her not with formality but with warmth, remembering her name without hesitation. Lydia was stunned, barely able to speak as she sat down. "Am I in trouble?" she finally asked. Owen gave her a gentle shake of the head and said, "Not at all. You reminded me of something important." Then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, he told her about the silent walks he'd taken across his own company in disguise, how he had watched from the shadows, unseen and unheard, and realized that in all their successes, they had lost something, humanity. And somehow, through one jammed printer, one honest voice, he had heard it again. Lydia, with her small acts of kindness, her quiet courage, and her exhausted yet unfiltered truth, had become the reminder he didn't know he needed. She had spoken aloud what no one else dared, that people felt invisible, that behind the numbers and synergy, there were beating hearts desperate to be acknowledged. Owen offered her something unheard of, a place in Project Ember, a special task force to reshape the company culture through empathy, inclusion, and authenticity. Lydia's breath hitched. "Me?" she whispered, not fully believing it. "But I'm just admin." "No," Owen replied firmly. "You're the kind of leader this company desperately needs." For the first time in years, she felt seen, not for her job title, not for her mistakes or her fatigue, but for her humanity. The days that followed were transformative. Lydia entered the glass-walled conference room with a notebook clutched to her chest, still unsure if she belonged. But Owen was already there, pulling out her chair with a quiet smile and saying, "We don't do formalities here. We do truth." Slowly, she began to find her voice. She noticed how Owen listened, really listened, to everyone. He never dominated the room. He waited, allowing silence to grow until someone brave enough filled it. And when Lydia finally did, saying, "Sometimes people don't leave because of the work. They leave because no one sees them," he didn't just nod. He wrote it down word for word. Later that day, he told her it would appear in the next company newsletter. The quote went viral internally. That week, a cup of coffee appeared on Lydia's desk, made exactly the way she liked it. A sticky note was tucked beneath the sleeve. "Thanks for reminding me how much kindness matters." Oh, by the third week, Lydia stopped second-guessing herself. She stood taller, she spoke freely, and her quiet presence began to ripple through the company. Others started to seek her out for advice. One colleague even called her the heart of the project. And through it all, Owen remained a steady force, not leading with ego but with trust. He noticed the smallest efforts, from a smile offered to a stressed intern, to the way Lydia juggled her workload without complaint. There was something in the way he looked at her too, not inappropriately but with a quiet reverence, as if he saw something sacred in her resilience. One afternoon, after a long meeting, he walked beside her and said softly, "You're good at this, at seeing people. That's rare." She flushed with emotion, unsure how to respond. "Thank you," she managed. "You remind me," Owen added, "why I started this company in the first place." That simple truth landed in her chest like a warm weight. In all her struggles, through the divorce, the sleepless nights, the ignored hellos in the hallway, someone finally saw her, not just as a helper, but as a force. And more than that, he trusted her to help rebuild something greater. It was the beginning of a quiet revolution, not just for the company, but for Lydia herself. Because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't shrinking to survive. She was growing to lead. By the third week of joining Project Ember, something within Lydia Hart had changed. Quietly, steadily, but unmistakably. She no longer hesitated when someone turned to her for thoughts during meetings. The shrinking posture, the anxious glances, the urge to apologize before every sentence, all of it began to fade. In its place, there was clarity, and beneath it, a steady hum of newfound confidence. It didn't happen all at once, but like a sunrise slipping over the horizon, its arrival was sure. She began to see herself not just as an assistant trying to survive, but as a woman who had something to offer, a voice that deserved to be heard. When the team discussed emotional burnout, Lydia raised her hand. Her voice was steady, if a little soft, as she said, "Sometimes people don't leave because of the workload. They leave because no one sees them." For a moment, the room fell silent. Across the table, Owen Marsh, CEO of the company, and the quiet man who once fixed the copier, met her eyes and nodded. Then he wrote her words down, word for word, without altering a syllable. Later that day, he found her by the break room and said, "That line, it's going in the next company newsletter. It deserves to be heard." Lydia blinked. "Really?" she asked, still not quite used to being taken seriously. "Really," he said with the kind of warm certainty that settled nerves like a steady hand on a restless shoulder. The very next morning, a familiar paper coffee cup waited on her desk. The temperature was perfect, just how she liked it, light, no sugar, and beneath the cardboard sleeve was a sticky note in neat slanted handwriting. "You've changed more here in 2 weeks than some have in 10 years. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. In truth, she did both, quietly, at her desk, for no one to see. Soon something began to shift beyond Lydia. Colleagues started to ask her opinion. One, during a brainstorming session, jokingly called her the heart of the project. She tried to brush it off, but the words lodged somewhere deep inside. She began to carry herself differently, not out of arrogance, but because for the first time she felt her presence mattered. She wasn't just occupying space, she was shaping it. All the while, Owen remained constant, never overbearing, always listening. He asked before instructing. He thanked more than he critiqued, and yet there was something else in the way he looked at Lydia now. Not unprofessional, never inappropriate, but undeniably human. He leaned in when she spoke, eyes focused, as if her words were the most important ones in the room. She noticed the pause in his breath before replying, the gentleness in how he handed her notes or offered her tea after a long meeting. One afternoon, after a particularly intense planning session, they walked out of the room together. Owen fell into step beside her, hands tucked loosely in his pockets. "You're good at this," he said. "At what?" she asked, caught off guard. "At seeing people," he replied. "Really seeing them, that's rare." She smiled shyly, not sure how to respond. "Thank you," she murmured, and then he added, "You remind me why I started this company in the first place." The words landed like a stone in a still pond, sending quiet ripples across the surface of Lydia's heart. He wasn't saying it for effect. He meant it. She could hear the truth in the simplicity of his voice. And with that moment, something shifted again. The distance between them, CEO and admin, leader and listener, grew smaller. Still professional, still appropriate, but imbued with something deeper. Mutual respect, recognition, and a quiet tenderness neither of them dared name just yet. Lydia began to believe not just in the project, but in herself, in what she could become. Not because Owen saw her potential, but because he helped her see it too. And with every coffee cup, every listening ear, every simple sticky note, he reminded her that leadership isn't loud. It doesn't always come with titles or corner offices. Sometimes it wears rolled-up sleeves and listens more than it speaks. Sometimes it fixes a broken printer without asking for thanks. And sometimes it shows up quietly, steadily, in the form of someone who simply believes in you before you believe in yourself. Even as Lydia began to blossom in her new role within Project Ember, the reality of workplace dynamics proved complicated. She had spent so long being invisible that when she finally began to be seen, the spotlight didn't just bring warmth, it brought scrutiny. The whispers started shortly after Owen quoted her in the company-wide newsletter. Her line, "People don't leave because of the workload, they leave because no one sees them," had resonated deeply across departments, even landing in the hands of HR. But not everyone saw it as inspiration. "She acts like she's better than us just because the boss likes her," she overheard someone say near the break room. Lydia had stepped out just in time to catch the words, her hand tightening around her water bottle. The voice belonged to Dana, a senior admin who had been with the company for over a decade. "I bet she thinks she's next in line for a promotion," another added. "You know how it goes when the CEO starts paying attention to a pretty face." The words struck like tiny, precise darts. Lydia didn't move. She didn't cry. She simply walked back to her desk, her chest hollow and her pulse loud in her ears. That afternoon, the elevator ride became a quiet stage for confrontation. Lydia waited alone until Dana and her colleagues approached. The tension was thick, the silence almost audible. Then, unexpectedly, Owen appeared, sleeves rolled as always, stepping into the corridor with effortless calm. He didn't raise his voice, didn't single anyone out, but as he stood between Lydia and the others, his words cut through the discomfort with precision. "In this company, we respect those who speak with courage. You can join the change or be left behind." No one replied. The elevator dinged. Owen stepped in, holding the door open. Lydia hesitated, then joined him. Their eyes met. No words were exchanged, but his gentle smile said what she needed most to hear. "You're not alone." The next morning, an unexpected olive branch arrived. A small white box tied with gold ribbon sat on Lydia's desk. Inside were lemon shortbread biscuits, her favorite, and a folded note that read, "We're sorry. Thanks for doing what we didn't dare." Her breath caught in her throat. She looked up and across the office, only to find Dana watching her quietly. Their eyes locked for a moment, and Dana gave the smallest of nods. At lunch that day, 2 of the women from that group invited Lydia to join them for takeaway. She hesitated, but then said yes. Over shared sandwiches and laughter about the absurd cost of parking, something cracked open between them. What began as surface-level chit-chat slowly morphed into the beginnings of camaraderie. In the following days, something unfamiliar began to take root in Lydia's world: community. Dana dropped off a coffee one afternoon, smiling sheepishly. "Truce," she said, half joking. Lydia smiled back. "I think we're well past that." The ice had broken. For the first time in years, Lydia didn't feel like she had to shrink to fit in. Her presence was no longer questioned, it was welcomed. And yet, the change wasn't because she had fought to be liked. It was because she had dared to be honest, to speak out when it mattered, even if her voice shook. And others, slowly, cautiously, had followed. She had not delivered a grand speech or staged a rebellion. She had simply stood in the uncomfortable truth of her own worth, and someone, beginning with Owen, had chosen to stand beside her. Lydia learned a vital lesson in those weeks. Being seen can be just as terrifying as being invisible. But the antidote to fear isn't hiding, it's courage, the quiet, trembling kind, the kind that dares to keep showing up, even when eyes are watching, waiting to misunderstand. And sometimes when you lead with honesty and heart, you don't just change your own life, you create space for others to rise too. The whispers faded, the community grew stronger, and Lydia, for the first time in a very long while, began to believe that she didn't just belong. She was becoming someone others could look to. Lydia had faced storms before, but nothing quite like this. As the gentle warmth of community and purpose began blooming around her at work, an old shadow crept back into her life. Tom, the man she had once loved, married and fled from, was back, uninvited and unwelcome. She found him leaning against a sleek black SUV outside her flat, dressed in a shirt too crisp for someone who claimed to struggle, his posture arrogant, eyes glinting with entitlement. "Nice place," he sneered. "New man, new life, huh?" Lydia tensed, clutching her daughter Carol's tiny hand protectively. "I'm just here to pick up my child," she said coolly. But Tom wasn't here just to say hello. He pulled out a folded sheet of paper and waved it with smug confidence. "I've been thinking. All those years of emotional trauma, your nagging and control, I think I deserve something back. 25 grand should do it." Lydia's breath caught. "You want what?" she managed. "Emotional damages," he said lightly. "You're doing well now working for that fancy CEO. You've moved on. Seems fair I get something too." The threat didn't end there. When Lydia flatly refused, his tone darkened. "Maybe I file for custody. Tell the courts you're unstable. Single mother, no family support, new man influencing your child. I'll make them listen." Lydia walked away before she crumbled in front of him. That night, she didn't sleep. Her thoughts raced, dragging her into memories she thought she'd buried. The gaslighting, the isolation, the nights she cried in silence, doubting her own worth. She had left him once, but now here he was again, pressing the same bruises. By 2 a.m., Lydia sat curled on the cold bathroom floor, hugging her knees, staring at her reflection. Her face was pale, her eyes red, but behind them flickered something fierce. Resolve. "I left once," she whispered to herself. "I can stand again." At work the next day, Owen noticed immediately. She smiled through the morning meeting, but her usual spark was dimmed. After the session, he gently asked her into his office. She didn't mean to tell him everything, but the words poured out. The threats, the fear, her daughter, her past. Owen listened without interruption, his brow furrowed, his eyes both fierce and kind. When she finished, he didn't offer vague platitudes. Instead, he simply said, "Come with me." No hesitation, no drama, just quiet determination. They didn't go to the police, not yet. Instead, Owen took her to a discreet office downtown with polished floors and a brass plaque that read Shelton and Crane, Family Law. "I trust them," he said, "but you're in charge. I just brought you to the door." Inside, Lydia met Marlene, a calm, seasoned solicitor who welcomed her with warmth and quiet confidence. "Tell me everything," she said, and Lydia did. She told her about the manipulation, the veiled threats, the fear that had never truly left her. And when she was done, Marlene leaned back and said, "We'll need records, emails, messages. But we've seen men like him before. We don't lose to men like him." Later that evening, as Lydia stepped out of the law office, Owen was waiting in the lobby, holding 2 cups of tea. No words, just presence. She took the tea, hands still trembling, and whispered, "Thank you." Owen shook his head. "You don't need to thank me. You stood up today. I just drove." When court day arrived, Lydia sat tall and silent, her lawyer beside her and Owen quietly watching from the back. Tom's lawyer spun tales of emotional suffering and financial hardship, accusing Lydia of abandoning him, of denying him closure. But then it was Marlene's turn. Calm, surgical, she laid out the evidence. Recordings, threatening emails, a neighbor's written testimony. The final blow was an email Tom had sent demanding money or he'd make sure the court takes your daughter. The judge's face hardened. Then it was Lydia's moment. Her voice was soft, but it didn't waver. "I stayed silent for years because I thought it kept my daughter and me safe. But silence didn't protect us, it only protected him." She paused. "I'm not perfect, I'm still afraid, but I'm a mother, and Carol deserves a life free from fear from men who confuse control for love, and so do I." The room held its breath. The judge ruled swiftly. No compensation, no custody, and a permanent no-contact order. As Lydia walked into the corridor, Owen stood waiting. "You were incredible," he said. She looked at him, tears brimming. "I'm just tired of being afraid." He reached for her hand, not to lead her, not to rescue her, but to hold it, steady and equal. For the first time in years, she didn't flinch. Lydia had grown used to the background. For so long, she operated in the quiet margins, head down, voice soft, movements careful. Even with the newly formed Project Phoenix, even with Owen Hayes, the CEO who had seen something in her when no one else did, she still hesitated to fully step forward. But something was shifting. The meetings on the 10th floor, filled with discussion about compassion and workplace culture, began to chip away at her self-doubt. Each week, she found herself speaking a little more, offering insights not because she sought praise, but because she believed they mattered. One day, during a conversation about emotional burnout, Lydia said softly, "Sometimes people don't leave because of the workload. They leave because no one sees them." The room fell quiet. Owen looked at her, nodded, and scribbled the words down verbatim. Hours later, he told her, "That line's going in the next company newsletter." She blinked, stunned. "Really? Really?" he said, eyes steady. "It deserves to be heard." And that's when the murmurs began. It was subtle at first. Quiet glances in the hallway, whispered conversations that stopped when she approached. Then came the break room incident. Lydia had stepped away to fill her water bottle and returned just in time to hear Dana, a senior admin, muttering to someone, "She acts like she's better than us just because the boss likes her." Another voice chimed in, "I bet she thinks she's next in line for a promotion." Lydia froze, her stomach twisted. For years she had feared exactly this, being visible only to be resented. She had spent so much time making herself small just to avoid stepping on toes. Now, with one kind word from a CEO, one quote in a newsletter, she was suddenly too visible, too seen. That afternoon, while waiting for the lift, she spotted the group again. The same group. They fell into silence as they realized she'd heard them. Then, unexpectedly, Owen appeared in the corridor, crisp blazer, sleeves rolled up, eyes calm but clear. He stood beside Lydia, close enough to feel like a shield, but not a crutch. His voice was quiet but firm. "In this company, we respect those who speak with courage. You can join the change or be left behind." The lift arrived. He stepped in, holding the door. Only Lydia followed. The next day, something unexpected happened. On her desk sat a small white box tied with gold ribbon. Next to it, a folded note in a nervous but neat hand. "We're sorry. Thanks for doing what we didn't dare." Inside the box were lemon shortbread biscuits, Lydia's favorite. She didn't know how they knew, but the gesture cracked something open in her. Across the office, she caught Dana watching her. Their eyes met. Dana gave a tiny nod. And just like that, the thaw began. At lunch, two of the same women who had whispered about her the week before invited her to join them for takeaway. Lydia hesitated. Years of isolation had taught her to expect cold shoulders. But then she said yes. Over sandwiches and tea, they spoke about their kids, laughed about office mishaps, and for a moment, Lydia let herself be part of something. By the end of the week, they were debating over who had the best office mug collection and sharing restaurant menus via email. Dana even dropped off a coffee with a smirk, saying, "Truce?" Lydia smiled. "I think we're way past that." It wasn't about popularity. It wasn't about being liked. It was about being known. For so long, Lydia had believed she had to disappear to survive. But now she was learning that being seen didn't have to come with a cost. That kindness could echo. That courage, once spoken, could make space for others to be brave too. The whispers hadn't disappeared entirely, but they no longer ruled her. Lydia carried herself differently now, not with arrogance, but with the quiet certainty that her voice mattered. She spoke in meetings without shrinking. She challenged ideas thoughtfully, not fearfully, and when she laughed, it was real, not apologetic. Owen continued to leave her coffee each morning, sometimes with quotes, sometimes just a small thank you scribbled on a sticky note. Once it read, "You've changed more here in 2 weeks than some have in 10 years. She didn't know what to say to that. She didn't need to, because the shift wasn't about approval. It was about belonging. And for the first time in a very long time, Lydia didn't feel alone in the room. Lydia had always been careful with her boundaries, especially at work. Even as the culture began to shift around her, thanks in no small part to Owen's quiet leadership and Project Phoenix, she still kept her personal life locked behind invisible doors. But life doesn't always respect boundaries. One evening, as she rocked her feverish daughter Carol on the couch, the weight of solitude pressed heavier than usual. The medicine had been given, the calls to the pediatrician made, but all she could do now was wait. The room was dim, the hum of the fridge the only sound besides Carol's uneven breathing. When Lydia checked her phone, there was a single email from Owen. She had apologized earlier that day for missing a meeting, and his reply was swift and simple. "Take care of your little one. Everything else can wait." That sentence, those 7 words, were a salve to something deeper than exhaustion. She read them twice. No one had ever told her that before. At 3:40 p.m. there was a knock at the door. She wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole she saw a courier holding a bright blue package with a ribbon. "For Lydia Moore?" he asked when she cracked the door. No signature was needed. She sat cross-legged next to her daughter, the box resting on the rug between them. Inside was a plush bunny with floppy ears and tiny stitched pink hearts on its paws. Carol had once pointed to the same bunny in the supermarket weeks ago, smiling with wonder. Beneath it lay a note. "Hope she gets better soon," from someone who thinks her mom's doing a great job. Below that, in smaller handwriting, "You take care of so many. Let someone take care of you just a little." Lydia's breath caught. The tears arrived quietly, soaking into her shirt. She didn't cry just for Carol's illness, but for the times she'd been strong when she didn't want to be, for the moments when she'd smiled despite being unseen. Someone had noticed, someone had remembered, and for the first time in years, she felt the sacred comfort of being held, emotionally if not physically. The fever broke the next morning. Carol, still drowsy, curled up with the bunny as if it had always belonged to her. When Lydia arrived at work that Monday, her desk held a familiar sticky note in Owen's handwriting. "Hope the little bunny helped." No signature, no explanation needed. She smiled and tucked the note into her drawer right next to the photo of Carol in her dinosaur pajamas. It meant something, more than she could admit. But just when she began to feel steady again, the past came knocking. Literally. One afternoon, as she returned from collecting Carol at preschool, Lydia spotted him. Tom, her ex. He leaned against a sleek black SUV wearing a smug grin and a button-down shirt that didn't belong in their part of town. "New flat, new man, new life?" he sneered. Her hand instinctively tightened around Carol's. "I'm just here to pick up my kid," she said calmly. But Tom, never one to accept a boundary, pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. "I think you owe me," he said. 25 grand. Emotional damages, let's call it. You're doing well now, right?" Lydia's jaw dropped. "I'm not giving you a penny." His smile twisted. "Then maybe I file for custody. Tell the court about your emotional instability. Depression, no family support, a new boyfriend interfering. You know how that sounds." His words were poison dressed as politeness. That night, Lydia didn't sleep. She sat in the dark of her bathroom, knees to chest, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She looked scared, but behind the fear flickered something stronger. "I left once," she whispered to herself. "I can stand again." The next day, she told Owen everything. He listened not as a CEO, not even as a colleague, but as someone who cared. He didn't speak until the end. Then with quiet urgency he said, "Come with me." He didn't take her to the police, not yet. Instead, they pulled up outside a discreet office downtown, Shelton and Crane Family Law. Inside, Lydia met Marlene, a seasoned solicitor who radiated quiet strength. Lydia told her everything about Tom's control, the gaslighting, the threats. Marlene nodded. "We've seen men like him. We don't lose to them." That night, Owen handed her a cup of tea in the lobby without a word. She took it with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't have to thank me," he replied. "You stood up today, I just drove." And that was the difference. Owen didn't rescue Lydia. He stood beside her. He handed her the torch. but she chose to carry it. Sometimes life has a way of placing the heaviest burdens on the kindest shoulders. For years, Lydia carried the weight of survival alone, juggling motherhood, work, heartbreak, and the quiet ache of invisibility. She never asked for applause, only for the chance to breathe without fear. When her ex-husband reappeared, threatening her stability with manipulative demands and veiled custody threats, it would have been easy for her to crumble. But instead, she rose. Not because she was fearless, but because she was tired of being afraid. With the quiet support of someone who genuinely saw her, Owen, the CEO who had once fixed a printer and now stood beside her in court, Lydia learned a truth many forget. Real strength isn't loud. It's in the whispered affirmations you give yourself at 2 a.m. It's in showing up, again and again, even when you're exhausted. And it's in allowing others to walk beside you when you're used to walking alone. What makes this story remarkable isn't just the courage Lydia found, it's the way her vulnerability became her power. In letting herself be seen, she inspired empathy, fostered connection, and reminded everyone around her that change begins with a single voice. Her journey teaches us that even if the world has failed to notice you, your truth still matters. You matter. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever felt unseen or underestimated, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your story. And don't forget to subscribe to Soul Stirring Stories 88, where we believe in second chances, quiet courage, and the beauty of being truly seen. Click the bell icon so you never miss a moment that might just shift your perspective or change your life.